welcome back to Coding with Mondo. This is part 2 of our building a website using HTML and CSS. In our last video, we left off building the HTML portion of the mockup over here, and I wanted to do a quick recap on what we learned on part 1. In part 1, we learned about what is HTML, which is short for Hypertext Markup Language. It defines the structure of our website content and essentially is a text document for the web. We learned how to structure and build our markup for the mock design representing the blog post. We learned about some elements such as div, which is this here, which is a division or a section in an HTML document. We learn about H1, which is a tag that defines HTML headings, and H1 defines the most important heading, while H6 defines the least important heading. We learn how to embed images in the HTML page using an image tag. And I wanted to clarify that images are not technically inserted into a web page, but the image tag creates a holding space for the reference image. And something I kind of missed on the last video is that the image tag actually requires two attributes. It requires a source here, which can be an image stored in the website folder. Like, for example, we have this image that is in the blog post 2021 folder. But you could also use an external source image, which is stored somewhere in the web. And then the second tag is actually a alt tag here, which usually you want to describe what's going on in the image. And if we open this image, we could say maybe lights or lights by buildings. It's a good way. So with the alt tag, it specifies an alternative text for the image if the image for some reason cannot be displayed and or for accessibility, such as screen readers. It will read this. So we could write image showing light by a building. You kind of want to describe what's going on. And if we go to our HTML and refresh here, we should be able to hover over it and show it, but for some reason it's not showing. So if we inspect, the screen reader will read this alt tag here. All right, so let's go back to our code. And I think that we also did the P tag, which represents a paragraph, and we also have a button, and that's self-explanatory. All right, so let's go for part 2. So in this video, we are going to go over what is CSS, and then we're going to try to create a style sheet, and then we're going to style our HTML to make our web page look like this versus what we currently have, which is just text and a really, really large image. All right, so let's go for what is CSS. So CSS is short for Cascading Style Sheet. CSS allows us to control the styling and layout of our web page. We can use it to style and alter font, the size of the color, the spacing of our content. So for example, here you see this big heading here, and it's kind of bold versus this text here. And then you see some highlighted text. All of this is powered by the CSS. If not, the web page will look literally like something like this. All right, so another thing is when it comes to CSS, you could also do things like splitting columns. We have tables, and just like HTML, there are hundreds of tags, and as a beginner, you're not required to memorize them. But it is important to understand how to use CSS so that you're able to add some presentation and layout to your web page. All right, so you might be asking, how can we start styling our web page template? So first, we need to go to the head of our web page here, and here we're going to add a link. And in this link, we're going to add a rel, and this rel here it's what's considered the relationship. So we'll name it style sheet here. And then we need an href. And an href, it specifies where your style sheet is coming from. So we will name it styles.css. And then it's one of those self-enclosed tags. All right, great. And then here we'll create a new file called I'm messing up here, CSS. All right, and if we go back to our web page and refresh, nothing should happen. But if we look here on the head, we have a style CSS, and most likely this is going to be empty, so nothing's happening. Cool. So before we even do anything, let's actually go to Google, and we're going to add a font. So we just look for Google Fonts here, and we will be using Roboto. I think that's how it's pronounced. And then here, and what's great about this is that Google has a bunch of free fonts that we could use, and it's pretty awesome. You could download it as well and use it on things like Figma. So like here, I am using, let's see if we could show what kind of fonts we're using here. It's not show. Here we go. Roboto, regular, 16 pixels. All right. So we're gonna need that, and the way to do that is you can select a style here. Select this style, and Google gives you not only how to import it, but it also tells you what rules to use. So we are going to copy this here, and we'll go back to our style CSS and we'll import this. And now this means that we're able to access this font because it's in our style CSS and is pointing to the Google fonts. Okay, cool. Now, even before we begin adding CSS, how does CSS look? How do you write it? So here's an example of a CSS syntax. And it shows this H1, right, which is a selector. It opens a selector, and this selects the HTML element that we are going to style. Then we have this curly bracket here where we'll add our declarations. This takes form as a property and value pairs. Each pair kind of specifies a property of the element or elements we are selecting. Then a value we like to give to the property. Now, CSS properties have different allowable values. For example, the color property here takes a color value, while the font size takes a size unit. So now let's actually copy this and show you what I mean. So if we do H1 color red font size 5em, meaning it's going to take this H1 and it's going to make it red, and then it's going to make a font size 5em. All right, or if we want, let's make this 100 pixels. Let's just do pixels for now. All right, if we go to our web page and refresh, this is what happens. It made our H1, which is our heading, this really big, 100 pixels, and made it red. So you can make this now whatever you want. You can make this 10 pixels, and we can make this blue. All right, refresh. Now it's really tiny and it's blue. All right, now, so remember, with CSS properties have different allowable values, and you could look at something like a documentation in here, and I will include this link in our description so that you're able to come here and you'll be able to see different things. Look at this example here. I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste here, and actually let's make this green. And if we go back to our web page, all the paragraph is green, and see our H1 is red. Cool. Now, as you continue to practice CSS, you will quickly learn some of these values. While in some cases, you will need to look up some documentation. And like I reminded earlier, you're not required to memorize all these things. It will slowly come to you. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about how everything in HTML or when using CSS, everything is like almost a box. And we have this example here. Now, when I mean a box, it's like when laying out our document, the browser renders represents each element as a rectangular box, and CSS determines the size, the position, and the properties such as color, background, border, size, etc. of these boxes. So remember, every box is composed of 4 areas: the content, the padding, the border, and the margin, which is here. All right, so now the content, which in case here is, let's use this p tag. The content is the text, correct? Now, the padding is what extends the content area, the surrounding area. So, see here, if we add 100, nothing's gonna happen. But if we add 100 here, oh, I'm in the wrong. Let's refresh. I need to be pointing at this p tag here. Let's point this p tag here. Now, if you notice, this p tag already has a margin of 16. And margin extends the border area. So a better way to show you is if I go to here, and I'm going to erase this here. I'm going to add p border 1 pixel solid black. So this border takes some arguments such as the size of the border, what type of border you want. You can have dash, solid, there's different properties, and the color. So when we refresh, oh, I didn't save it here. Let's save it, then refresh. You'll notice there's a black outline on this text here. And if we go back here, this, you see, now it shows a border all around. See, the margin extends the border area. So we could add 100 pixel here if we wanted to. And you see how it added all the space. And now the margin extends the border area, like I mentioned, and then the padding extends the content area to include the elements padding. So if we're here, right, and I add padding of 100, we'll see, let's see. You notice that the border is up here, right? So these are like the 4 things you'll probably need to keep reading about, and just remember that almost everything is a square, or sorry, everything is a rectangle in CSS. So you could use these things and manipulate how you want things to look like. All right, so for the purpose of this video, I'm gonna add what's kind of considered a reset. This reset will help our project kind of look the same on all browsers. And it will save you a lot of time when making sure that your websites look the same, because in the old days, resets were extremely important to make sure that your web page looks the same in all browsers, because most browsers were not following the same sort of standards. Today, most modern browsers do, but sometimes it's still important to include it, especially if maybe your website visitors might have an old browser, maybe Internet Explorer or something like that. So here I'm going to add a small reset where, if you notice how earlier I mentioned this already has some margin, I kind of want to start from fresh. So I want no margins on all my properties. And this is like a wildcard selector. It will select every single attribute or element and make sure that it doesn't have any margin. So if we refresh here, let's refresh, and now if you notice, there's no margins now. Another thing is also, here's another example. Look at this image. There's like a small see, there's like a small margin here, and sometimes that could drive you nuts. So we could just make sure, oops, there's no margin. And I also want no padding, and I want no border. And I want my font size to always be 100%. There's sometimes some browsers might have different font size or something like that. So I want to set the property here to be 100%. And then I'm going to use this thing called box sizing, and I'm going to use the property border box. Sorry, the value border box. So it is often useful to set this box sizing to border box to lay out elements. This makes dealing of the sizes of elements much easier, and generally eliminates a number of pitfalls you might stumble while you are styling your content. All right, so if we go back to here and refresh, we should expect no margins, no, let's see, no margins, no padding. Everything's reset. Everything is just default. All right, so let's talk about the HTML class attribute. So we are going to somehow connect the dots between our CSS and some of these elements. So if we have a class, let's say we have a class here called red. Class equals red. And in our style CSS, we have a decoration with color red. If we refresh, we notice that this city life architecture is red. Why? Because I added the class red to it. I could go ahead and also do something like blue. And go and maybe in this class do blue. As you notice, these both are p tags, but one is red and one is blue. But then I could also do something like p size 100 pixels. And let's see what happened here. Oh, font size 100 pixels. See, all my p tags are 100 pixels, but I have a class of red here and I have a class of blue. And this is what we mean by cascading style sheets. There's ways to add different rules, and some might have more precedence than other. And that's also something that you could read in some of these documentations and learn more about. For this video, we won't go over that. But I just wanted to do a quick example of what's a class, and HTML class attribute is used to specify a class for an HTML element, and multiple HTML elements can share the same class. So if we wanted to have red there and then maybe red here, class equals red, and then we refresh our page, you'll see red here and red here. And the class attribute is often used to point to class name in the style sheet, which is here, our style sheet. So now let's delete this and okay, and we'll refresh. Let's go back to normal. All right, so now that we have a basic understanding of class and we now have our style sheet linked to our HTML page, let's actually start styling our page to look like our mockup here. All right, so something we have here is we have this gray background, and what we kind of want to do is find out let's just set a background to our web page here, and we'll do it on the body. So we will select body here, and we want background color of, gonna copy and paste a color here, and we're gonna use hex color here, and I'm gonna refresh, and now we have a background of gray. All right, and now background color sets the background color of whatever element you're pointing to. Now we want to also set like a default size for our font, and we'll do 16 pixels here. This means that all our fonts will default to 16 pixels, anything nested under body. Great. So now we want to, now let's see, we want to specify our font family. And this is where this comes in. We want to set Roboto, and we then want a backup. So basically here, if this font is not available, we'll just default to like your systems or browser sans serif font. And we refresh. You notice that our font changed slightly. Maybe if I increase the font size to like 100. All right, this is extremely big, but you'll get the sense. You see, we need to talk, look how the font is. If I delete this, the font will look as a serif. You see, so now it's a little different. But we want to kind of match what we have here. And let's put this back, refresh, and now we have that font. The size is a little big, so let's go back to 16 pixels. Awesome. Great. Now, the next thing we want to do is maybe set the line height for our information here. So we could do line height, let's see, we can make it 1 and refresh, and it probably doesn't make a lot of changes, but it would, like for example, if we do 2, it'll add some spacing. And line height sets the height of the line box. It is commonly used to set the distance between the line and text. So it's more on, you'll see it more on a paragraph. For now, we'll just leave it as 1, and if anything, we'll change it later. All right, so I think we have a good set of rules. Our background is gray, and we have a default text size. Now, let's do the actual content. And then remember, we created this content of the web page. So if we look at this design, the content is basically everything that is not the gray background. So this content is, we have some color here, and it has all this information. So maybe let's focus on the background information for our content. And we also maybe want to center, we want to maybe center this content, and we also maybe want to add some padding, maybe add some width, and let's maybe start with the background. So we go here, and so let's add, because we have different divs and we don't want to change all the divs, we'll add a class here called content. And here we'll do content. So now this is the difference between the HTML element here, and then here we have a dot content. When you have a dot followed with some information, that's what defines a class. So here, content, we want background color, and I'm gonna copy the color here, and it has a hex here. There we go. And if we go back to our web page, our content is now this dark color. But if you see that, it's hard to see with the way this image is so big. So maybe for just for the case here, let's target our image and we'll add a width of maybe 100 pixels and a height of maybe 100%. Just whatever the width, do a ratio of that. All right, so this will make it a little easier for us to look at what's happening. So the content and background color is this, and maybe we want to set a width for this here. And if we see here is 605, let's maybe just round it down to 600. So do width 600 pixels. Let's go back, and now it's smaller. So you see we have this gray, we have this darker gray. And then let's set the image, let's actually delete this here for now. And, oh, actually, let's set the image to 100% of the, how you call it, of the parent element. So because the image is nested to this content container, I want to set this to be 100% so to fill up to this container. If we refresh, we have an image here and it's up to this container. Awesome. And then let's go back to our content. And then in our content, we want to maybe, let's try to center this to be in the center of this web page. And a way to do that is we set our margins to be 0. Margin here is a shorthand property. So you could do something like margin top, 0, margin bottom, 0. And then we could do something like margin left to be auto, and then margin right to be auto. Okay. And if we refresh, it will center it. And a shorthand to doing all this is to write margin 0 auto. And I'm going to delete this here so we don't need it anymore. And it's still center. So the specifying auto here as a second parameter basically tells the browser to automatically determine the left and right margin itself, which it does by setting them equally. All right, so this is now centered. We notice that the text here, for now, let's make color white, just so we're able to look at it. All right. We notice that the text is so close to the edge of this box here, right? So maybe we want to add some padding. And like mentioned here earlier, if we go to content, we can add some padding here. See how adding some space between the text and the edge here? So that would be the padding. So let's add some padding. Maybe the padding is 35 pixels. And the way for me to remember is I can maybe check here. Let's see. See, the text is almost like 40 from the edge. So let's actually make it 40. And I'm going to refresh. And now I added 40 pixels all around. So let's see, there's the edge, 40 pixels, 40 pixels, 40 all around. If I wanted to just do left and right, it's the same rule as margin. I could do padding left, 40 pixels, padding right, 40 pixels. And you notice left and right, or just like the margin 0 auto, I could do padding 0 on top and bottom, and 40 for left and right. Right. But for now, I just want the whole thing to be 40. So when it's just one argument, it'll do all 4 areas. When it's 2 arguments, it'll do top and bottom and left and right. For now, we want the whole thing to be 40 pixels so that it can match this design here. Another thing we want to do is maybe the size is a little small here, the height. So what we could do is make the height 100 VH, and this will set the element height to be the height of like equal 100% of the view area, meaning that if it will always show the background. It will go all the way to whatever view area you have. This is what's considered a view area. So even if I scroll up or down, you'll always be there. All right, and then maybe another thing we want to do is, actually, let's keep it this way. Let's move on to creating maybe this circle here. Which is something we didn't do earlier. So since it's a circle, let's create a class here called circle. All right, and then the circle won't have any content because we are going to try to, let's refresh here. See, there's nothing here. But remember how I mentioned everything is almost like a rectangular box when it comes to CSS. So because it is a rectangular box, we could go here to our class, make a circle, and we could set a height of, let's say, 100 pixels, and we could set a width of 100 pixels, and we'll see something here, right? It doesn't show anything. Let's say we wanted to add a background. Background color of, let's look at the design, and I'm going to copy and paste this here. And we have, let's see, we refresh, we have this square, but we want a circle. All right, so we will use a property called border radius, and this property rounds the corners of the element out of border range, right? So you can set a single radius to make a circular corners, or you could use 2 to make like elliptical corners if you wanted to. So if we go here and we use border radius, and we'll make it, let's do 10% so you can see what I mean. So it created this like edgy thing here, but we want it to be a full circle. So what we could do is, let's try 40%. Let's try 40% for now. It's almost a circle, right? So let's try 50%. So this looks like a circle. Now, what happens if we made it 80%? Nothing happens. But for now, since 50 does the job, this will work. Now, let's say you want it just like the other, this is a shorthand. So if we wanted to do maybe 50% for top and bottom and like 10% for left and right, this is what happens. Looks almost like a HelloFresh logo or something, or like a lemon. Let's just keep it as 50%. And now we have, this is great. And let me set this back to 100% for a browser. Okay, so our design is, it's getting there, right? But this is more like 70 by 70. So let's go back here and make it 70 here, 70 pixels in the height and width. There we go. Awesome. And something I noticed is, if you notice here, we have some spacing in between our elements. So let's add some margin. And like I mentioned, margin is the, how do you call it? margin does sets the margin area in the bottom. It extends the border area to include an empty area used to separate the elements from its neighbors. So if we do margin bottom here, and let's use maybe 40 pixels, it adds some space, right? So if we look at our design, yeah, 40, cool. So we'll do 40, and now we have some spacing. Now let's target our image here. The image, we made the width to be 100%. Maybe let's also follow the same rules here and add the 40 pixels so we can have some separation between the image and this heading. So we already have an image tag here, so we'll just do margin bottom 40 pixels. All right, so we have some spacing. And then our design has like a nice little like white border around it. So let's again go target our image, and we will do border 1 pixel. We want it to be solid. Actually, let's look at dash, and then we'll make it white. So you can see a dash example. See, a dash has a little dashes, right? But maybe we want solid. Let's just keep it solid for now. And let's go back, refresh. We have solid. All right, so now let's target this heading here. All right, so naturally, if the browser will have a predetermined height set, and we already override everything, but usually H1s are large. So we are going to use, let's see what we have here. It's set as 32 pixels and regular. So if we go back here, we have this H1 red. Let's actually delete these here. We don't want this here, and we don't want this here. And maybe we could change this. Actually, we'll just keep H1. We'll target the H1 for now. So let's create H1 here. And we want to set the size to 32 pixels. We refresh. It's nice. All right. So then we also want to add some spacing here so that it follows the same 40 pixels approach. So we'll do margin bottom 40 pixels. 40 pixels. Refresh, we have some spacing. And then the color's white, but we set this here. We don't want everything to be white. So we'll take this content out and we'll add color white here. All right, so we kind of lost this color here, but it's fine. And then maybe we want to add some line height so that this text is not too close to each other. And we'll make it maybe line height of 1.4. Let's make it 1.2 for now. Okay, that's perfect. All right, and then I think that's good, but this doesn't really match this, right? And we notice that we have this like red text for architecture, but our H1 happens to be overriding everything and just showing white, right? So we want to somehow target this here. And this is a great introduction to a new HTML element called span. And span is an element which is like a generic inline container for phrasing content. And we will use this to target the word architecture. So if we go to our index HTML, we'll look for architecture and we'll add a span here. And we'll copy this here and add architecture. We'll refresh and nothing happened. We could inspect here and we'll see that architecture's here, but nothing's really happening. All right, so what we could do is we could add a class to the span, or we could just target the span. And since we only have one span, let's just target the span. So we'll write span, and we want to set maybe the weight should be a little bigger here for architecture. And then we want to make this the same red color, which is here. And I'm going to copy this here. And we'll do color. And let's see what happens. There we go. It's red. Okay. And then what else do we need? I think that's good for now. All right, so now we want to, something I didn't explain, I guess, is color. Color is, this sets the property of the foreground color of an element, text and text decoration. It can take a name value, such as red, white. It could take blue, any color that you could think of. It could also take hex color value, RGB, and even HSL. But for now, we'll stick to the basics and just use hex colors. Or if we know the color by heart, like white, black, red, green, we'll use that. But because I want to match this design as much as possible, I'm going to use the colors I selected. All right, so let's move on to this city life architecture tag, I guess. If we go to index, we have this. And maybe since we have two p tags and we want them to look completely different, we'll target this one and we'll add a class and we'll name it tag or tags. And then we go to styles. We'll create a class here. And we want to target the color. What's the color here? The color is this here. I'm going to copy it. And color, and if we go back to our web page and refresh, we have the color. And we also want to match the margins here. So margin bottom 40 pixels. Awesome. So let's move now to our I guess this is, we could consider this a description, we could consider this a summary. So let's go and look at the summary. Here we'll add a class called summary. And in our styles, we'll create a summary declaration. And this summary, let's see, we want to maybe add some line height so that our text is not so close to each other, and we'll make it like 1.5 or something like that. And then we'll add a color, and the color is just white. And if we don't want to use white, you could use a hex color FFFFF, which represents white as well. But for now, let's keep it white. All right, so there we go. And I keep repeating this, but we also want the spacing, right? And maybe the spacing is the same, 40 pixels on the bottom. So the reason I'm using 40 pixels bottom is easier to know if you set the element to go down, it'd be easier because you might have a case where, let's say this had like a margin top and this has a margin bottom, and then you might be competing with the margin. So it's better to just either take the approach of going down or take the approach of adding margin up. Since we read from top down, it's easy to just add the margin bottoms. All right, so this looks good. It's almost there. what's left is this read more button, this call to action. And we have this button, and we essentially need to, add the background, add some color, maybe increase the read more. Before we go and actually design, or sorry, edit this button, let's actually make this button a little smaller so that we can have a little bit more real estate in this web page. So let's go back and target our circle here and make it more like we could do 20 pixels instead. And let's see what happens here. Okay, so now we have more real estate. It doesn't really take much out of the design. So it still works. Maybe we can make it 30 pixels here. Okay, cool. So let's now, let's maybe change the background and change the text here. So the background for this button, we can either add a class, or since it's only one button, let's just target the button directly. And we'll do background color. We'll use the same as our span here. Save it, refresh, and now we have a color of that same color pattern we have here. Let's change the text to white. So we'll do color, and we'll do white, and we'll refresh here. We have white. And then in our design, I think we were all uppercase, so we could use this this CSS property called text transform. And what this does is that we can specify how we capitalize an element's text. We could either make it all uppercase or all lowercase. So let's do uppercase here. We'll refresh, and it's all uppercase. And then another thing we need to do is, if you notice, there's some padding here between the text and the top and the bottom, and this formula 25, 39. For now, let's just round it up to 26. Those numbers will drive you nuts. So just do padding top 26 pixels, and we'll do padding bottom 26 pixels. And let's go back. Oh, yep, I misspelled it. So we'll do padding bottom. Awesome. And then we want this to be the same width as these. And what we could do is we could just do width 100% instead of us trying to figure out what number it is. So this 100% would be 100% of the container. So if we removed this button from this content container, this is what happens. The button will be now 100% of this whole page. If we refresh, see, now it takes 100%. But what we want is, we want it to be 100% of this container. All right. We are going to renest it here. And the reason there's spacing here and here is because we specified that in our content container, we wanted to have the padding all around for 40%. Okay. This looks like our design. There's probably a few things different. We decreased the size of this circle. We added the border, but I think everything looks almost identical to this design. We're probably missing this line. We could do that on a different video, but I think that we have completed our mockup, and we could say that is almost, we could say almost 99% close to the mockup. There might be things to consider if we want this to look good on mobile devices, or we want this to look good on a tablet. For the desktop, it's kind of small, right? Maybe we want some design that takes up more real estate, right? So there's many things to consider when doing big screens, smaller screens. There's also a lot of things we could learn more about HTML and CSS to make this better or cleaner. One thing here is, we're kind of mixing classes and elements. Some people might be school of thoughts that everything should be a class and you shouldn't be targeting things directly, or the other way around, right? So, these are things to consider while you continue to learn HTML and CSS, and take the time to do a deeper dive on both subjects. But I think this is the end of part 2, and I think that if you enjoyed this brief introduction to HTML and CSS and would like to see more, please leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.